the graphics are less because I want you to understand the system and its techniques. Intellectually, I want you to understand it. And then one can show examples with photographs and so on. We made a little short survey before you came of Artena to show some concepts in Artena. So the first slide here. I'm sorry, no, don't change.
No,
I'll tell you when to change. Yeah. We go through the text so that we can understand it carefully. There is radical difference between the traditional system and contemporary urbanism planning and so forth. Very, very different. So the idea is that if we can understand how the traditional system works, we can understand towns like Artena and many in Italy. There's hundreds probably of villages and towns which were produced following a traditional system like this one. It's a different system of conception, implementation, and associated process of growth and change. Also, the responsibilities which were allocated to the people involved in decisions, and the method space was conceived, partitioned, configured, and controlled. So you can see we are already in a very different territory from the contemporary system. I will essentially address underlying system of traditional experience and what we can learn from and recycle for contemporary use. It is the nature of generative process and its lessons, including the manner of responsibilities, the way they are allocated to various parties, that are very important. So this is a starting slide just to show you, to make the point clear that we're dealing with very different situation in the past which created these traditional towns. And this applies not only to the Mediterranean towns, to all traditional towns in Europe and beyond Europe, in Asia and so forth. And there are there's almost hardly any information available on this. And I took it upon myself from 1975 till now, which is 39 years, to externalize and document this system. Instead of spending my time as an architect or urban planner or running around after projects and making a few extra dollars, I decided this is more important. Next. An important concept to understand is that if we want to learn from the traditional system anything which is useful and applicable today, we don't do this. We don't jump from this to this. Usually, most of the projects which are so-called neo-traditional and so forth are copying elements and features of traditional towns and applying them. Contemporary architects would apply them with their own abilities and ingenuities, and the result is this kind of situation. But what is more important is this. Traditional environments, what are their concepts, models, theories behind them, what are the principles and lessons, and then you apply that into design. That's very important because this is what typically happens, especially in cities and towns which are very popular with tourists. you find a lot of projects generated like this. Just want to get some water.
I will get you water. I will get you water.
You have it.
Oh, it's okay.
Oh, yes, it.
Next one. Okay. The other question is the question of morphology, typology. The systems we are talking about are not directly designed for a particular typology and morphology. They have been applied with some variations in different contexts and created different built environments. This is a town in Yemen, South Yemen, called Shiban. These are skyscrapers made of mud bricks, and they're houses, multi-story houses, and they are compact next to each other. So this is one type of morphology. Another type is this one in Nigeria, northern Nigeria, and many parts of sub-Saharan Africa. These ones. These are made of compounds, large compounds. And the system which generated that is similar to what I'm explaining. This is typical in North Africa, made of the typology of the courtyard building. This is from Fez in Morocco. This is the typical typology and morphology which is found in North Africa. But I'm trying to show you that, in fact, very different situation in this case, and very different situation in this case. This area of Nigeria I have studied with a Nigerian colleague, and we published it. We published the results, and it's available on my website. Next. This is the same examples, but in clearer plan forms. This, by the way, is 50%. These two drawings are to the same scale. But this one is 50% smaller to fit on this panel. So imagine this is about so much. So this is Shiban. These are the towers. This is Fez. Very compact with cul-de-sacs, primary streets, cul-de-sacs, and so forth. And this is the Nigeria example, where the compounds, each large extended family is in one of these compounds. Next. This is a project I was involved in Bahrain, the old town of Muharrar, which is one of the earliest settlements on the island of Bahrain. And this is part of it. And this is typically what they are doing today. It reminds me of Artena, old Artena here, and our modern Artena down there. So if we have the two images of Artena, we could make the same point. But what is important is this statement here. This is a result of a generative process. This is a result of a pre-planned and designed approach. This approach here is based on a static plan in the form of a blueprint, commonly known as a master plan, that describes what needs to be done and which generates a fabricated structure. Whereas a generative program, which is this one, creates built environments are guided by a step-by-step procedure within a reasonable time frame. In essence, the generative process tells us what to do, what actions to take to build or revitalize buildings, rather than detailed drawings that tell us what the end result is supposed to be. If you can understand this, it's valuable. The blueprint master plan tells you what you have to do to achieve what's on that blueprint. The generative process deals with a step-by-step procedure, and sometimes the results are unpredictable. I'll talk about this phenomenon later. So, as I said, this is from Bahrain, but in fact, it can be applied to Artena, old, Artena new, and any other town you can think of in your countries. You can put an old Dutch town here. Next to it might be something not necessarily looks like that, but the result of a master plan or a blueprint. And that's what architects and planners are doing all over the world today. And we are left with these places which in many countries people are ashamed of. This is the tragedy. Yeah.
Are you wanting any discussion during or leave it till later?
Later.
Later, good. Okay, thank you.
Next.
Next.
This is an example of Tunis, old Tunis Medina, which is a result of a generative process, next to the so-called modern section, which was built by the French colonial system. At that time, Tunisia was under French colonial rule, and they built the new part of Tunis here, the grid, and so forth. Very totally different systems. Next. Now, let's talk about an analogy, the human embryo. The human embryo is a result of a generative process. If the cells of the embryo know where and when to change shape, contract, or move, then it begins to be possible to envisage a program for the development of form. And we can think of this pattern of cell activity as being part of the embryo's developmental program. It is a program that contains the instructions for making the shapes. A key feature of a generative program is that it can be made up of quite simple instructions, yet generate very complex forms. That's primarily, in other words, the human embryo, it doesn't grow like suddenly a hand is attached or a leg is attached or something. It's a process of growth according to the instructions in the cells and so forth. This is the author who I quote from. All information for embryonic development is contained within a fertilized egg. So how is this information interpreted to give rise to an embryo? Is the question. One possibility is that the structure of the organism is somehow encoded as a descriptive program in the genome, in the genes, which contain a program of instructions for making the organism, which is a generative program. So, of course, we are talking about a human embryo, but it can be applied to any embryo. in animals and so forth. That can be applied, but in a different context, to plants, trees, and so forth. Next. Another analogy is origami. I don't know how many of you are familiar with origami. Anybody not familiar with origami? This is a seal done by origami. But then if you don't have the steps, if you don't know the steps, you can't create that. So the origami is another, conceptually another example. By folding a piece of paper in various directions, it's quite easy to make a paper hat or a bird from a single sheet. To describe in any detail the final form of the paper with the complex relation between its parts is really very difficult. Not much help in explaining how to achieve it. Much more useful and easier to formulate are instructions on how to fold the paper. The reasons for this is that simple instructions about folding have complex spatial consequences. Simple instructions can create complex forms. In development, gene action similarly sets in motion a sequence of events that can bring a profound change in the embryo. One can think of the genetic information in the fertilized egg as equivalent to the folding instructions in the origami. Both contain a generative program for making a particular structure. So these are two analogies to kind of appreciate what we're talking about next. Okay. A generative program and their coding system related decision-making mechanism is that they really clearly replicate natural phenomena and related process of inception, growth, change, regional decay, and rebirth. The phenomenon of emergence that was discovered and elaborated on in the last 2 decades, or maybe a bit longer, by scientists from different disciplines confirms that these traditional terms follow models of sustainable natural process. We talk about sustainability, it's a flashy word these days, but there are so many definitions, and people kind of go from one definition or another. But in fact, the natural process is the best way to appreciate the concept of sustainability. Resulting system of habitat will be dynamic in nature, which means that emergent forms and configurations, particularly at the micro level, will be unpredictable. This is an important concept, which actually what happens in the formation of these traditional towns. The resulting qualities of forms will be unique to each location, thus enhancing the sense of place and identity at each micro level of the built environment. Just a side point, if you walk around Artena and you notice one spot, for example, where you're standing, and you walk a bit more, you will never find the same configuration again. Never. Each area and micro area is a result, has distinct features which are a result of the emergence we're talking about. So the resulting qualities of form will be unique to each location, thus enhancing the sense of place and identity at each micro level of the built environment. Those unpredictable and sometimes surprising results will be evident from the level of the house design, to the manner clusters of houses relate to each other, to the character of the public realm and streets, and to the level of the whole neighborhood. So in each micro condition is different, therefore each street or alleyway becomes different, or is different, and that creates a sense of attachment to these places. Consider the contemporary examples of subdivisions everywhere in the world. If you live in one and you go to the next street or the next street after that, they're all similar. Hence the importance of street names and house building numbers, house numbers. Many of these towns don't have street names because people know their immediate environment. Next. The lessons from the experience of traditional engineering in Near East towns, particularly in terms of control, management, coding, are applicable to the housing sectors of the contemporary future towns and cities. In other words, if somebody said, well, what do we do with this information? How is it useful? Well, it is useful in the sense if we are willing to apply them to the housing sectors of contemporary cities. That's where